Before we talk about the baptism, I wanted to talk about the idea of ordinance. Remember, I said even before, we believe in two ordinances. If you look at Roman Catholic church and Orthodox churches and many other churches, they have got 7 sacraments, right? 7 sacraments. For as far as we are concerned, we believe in ordinance. Because what is the difference between ordinance? We know we are going to look at a little bit. So ordinance is much more emblematic, much more, whereas sacraments are much more, they say people receive grace through this. So let's look at, first of all, what is an ordinance? We talk about 2 ordinances, baptism and Lord's table. So before we talk about baptism, let's look at ordinance. H. Strong, he defines ordinance as what? This outward rite which Christ is appointed to be administered in his church as visible signs of saving truth of the gospel. All right? So ordinances are outward signs, right? So this is appointed by Christ, outward rite appointed by Christ. This is administered in his church as a visible signs of saving truth of the gospel. That means ordinances symbolize the gospel. So keep that in your mind, right? Ordinance symbolizes the gospel, and has been much cited in Baptist literature, in especially if you look at many other areas. So understand what does this, what is the meaning of this one. What sets 2 ordinances apart from other ordained features of church life is not primarily soteriological function, but ecclesiological function. For example, there are other things you do in the church. They're all primarily are not soteriological in function, but ecclesiological in function. But as far as ordinance is concerned, they are the visible signs of saving truth of the gospel, right? Whether you talk about baptism, baptism presents the gospel. You talk about Lord's table, it also presents the gospel, if you really look into the meaning of this. So it is their function as a signs of visible union of the saints in the local bodies of Christ is what set them apart from distinctively as church ordinances. So we will look at that. So as such, I would adjust this definition to say, right, we already looked at what is Strong's definition. Now let's look at what we really are talking. Ordinance, an outward rite, right, that Christ has appointed to be administered in his church as a visible signs of the union of the believer with the Christ and his body. A little more refined, and we want to say ordinance actually visible signs of our union of the believer with the Christ and with his body. Let's take baptism. What is baptism symbolize? Baptism talks about the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And Paul says in Romans, yes, by being baptized, we tell to the world that we have a new life, right? So it is that we are identifying ourselves with Christ's death, right? If you look at the gospel, what is the center of the gospel? What is the center of the gospel? What is the foundation of the gospel? The death of Jesus Christ, right? There is no gospel that if that message doesn't have the death of Jesus Christ for the remission of our sins, right? There is no gospel. If that is true, then understand baptism symbolizes the gospel truth, that we are united with Christ, joined with Christ. When we are joined with Christ, we are also identified with Christ's death and resurrection. Number two, yes, we read the other day that people, by being baptized, they join to the local body of believers, to the church, right? So, yes, so these ordinances symbolizes visible signs of our union of our union with Christ and his body. Let's take Lord's table. We don't have to say much. Lord's table also talks about the death of Jesus Christ, right? Broken body of Jesus Christ, or the broken bread, or the bread and the wine symbolizes broken body of Jesus Christ and his blood for the remission of our sin. Whether you take baptism or you take Lord's table, both of them do what? Both of them symbolizes the gospel, soteriological truth, and our identification with the Christ and with his body of believers. Yes, we'll learn much about that as we learn about Lord's table. So friends, when we call something, see, there are many commandments in the Bible, right? There are many commandments. But why we say baptism and Lord's table are not simply commandments? Or you love your neighbor, that's a commandment. Love your enemies, Jesus said, commandment. See, there are many commandments, but they're not ordinances. Ordinances in a biblical, with a biblical idea, this is this, when we say there are only two ordinances, there are many commandments, but two ordinances. Number one is baptism. Number two, Lord's table. Why we say these are ordinances? Because these two are symbols of our saving faith. Gospel symbol, preaches the gospel very clearly. That's the reason we say there are two ordinances.